Hi, this is Gabe Witcher, and you're listening to Bluegrass Jam Along, the podcast for anyone and everyone who loves bluegrass.
So my guest on the Bluegrass Jam Along this week is fiddle player and producer Gabe Witcher. Gabe, it's great to have you here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
And a week ago, I would have said Gabe Witcher, fiddle player for Punch Brothers. And as of a couple of days ago, that's no longer the case.
That is true. That is true. I have, after 18 years, I have taken my leave of Punch Brothers and gonna do something else. Do other things.
It was really cool to see on sort of social, to see kind of, because everybody knew this was going to be your last couple of shows with the band. So it was kind of felt like, even seeing it from across the Atlantic via social media, it felt like a celebration. How were they, those last couple of shows?
Yeah, it was wonderful. So the last batch of shows was at the Telluride Bluegrass Festival, which itself was celebrating its 50th year. And it was actually my 21st year doing the festival. And as I started doing Telluride when I was still with Jerry Douglas, before Punch Brothers was even a thing. And so actually, Telluride has been a part of Punch Brothers' world since the very beginning. So it seemed like a really appropriate place to have the last couple shows and close out that chapter. And it was lovely. It was really, really lovely. Bittersweet for sure. It's always sad to leave something that's such a huge part of your life and so meaningful in so many ways. But it was filled with love and it was very positive. And to feel that from the band and from the larger bluegrass community and all of the people who participated with us, it was really I couldn't think of a better way to do that.
As you say, the 18 years, and that sort of goes back to before Punch Brothers was even called Punch Brothers, I guess. You were there from the beginning of it all. And I'd love to chat about that, because that sort of, as the band came together and, all these sort of different stories sort of coalesced into a band that then became Punch Brothers. And it feels like it was quite a meaningful time for you all. It wasn't just we've met, let's form a band. It felt like a real journey. Yeah,
well, it was a long time in the making. Because Chris Thiele and I actually met in the late 80s at a festival in Southern California called the Follows Camp Bluegrass Festival. And it was a brand new festival, not like not like a Telluride that's been going on since the 70s. But it was actually started by my first fiddle teacher, and he put it together in the mountains above Los Angeles. And I went to the first one, and I think I was the only kid musician there. And then by the second one, there were a couple other kids, and one of them was Chris Thiele. And he was, 7, 8 years old, something like that. And I'm a year or two older than him. But I remember being introduced to him, somebody saying, hey, you should meet this other kid. He plays mandolin and a bunch of stuff just like you. And you guys should get together and play. And we said, oh, nice to meet you. You want to go, let's go play football. So there was actually not any music being made at first. And we got a ball and went into the dirt road that ran along the festival and played. And we were just instant friends. And at that, later on in the evening after the music is when the jamming begins. And so I think at that point we probably got our instruments out and played and played and played and played. And from then on, there was just like, a very strong connection, musical and personal, really. And we would see each other, 3-4 times a year at various festivals in the area. And every time it was just like immediately, like just no time had passed. And we were right back where we had left off. And I think it was the following year, he said, oh, you got to meet my other friends that are going to come up from San Diego, Sean and Sarah Watkins. And so, there we were, this group, and there were a couple other kids around, but, there were 4 or 5 of us, 5 or 6 of us, I guess, actually, cruising around like a roving gang at these festivals. Just, so, we all kind of came up and grew up together. And Chris and I had always discussed finding a way to make music in a formal setting as opposed to these kind of informal jams at festivals or contests or whatever. And him and Sean and Sarah started Nickel Creek, and they were doing that. And then Chris moved from California to Kentucky, and we didn't get to see each other all that much for our teenage years, essentially. And it wasn't until they were back in Los Angeles making, I think it's their third record, Why Should the Fire Die, that we all reconnected. They would call me when they were getting out of the studio and, hey, come over to this house that we rented and let's hang. We're done for the day. And over the course of a couple of months of these hangs, Chris and I finally just went, hey, I think it's time for us to actually put something together. And we didn't know what it would be. And we didn't want to specify actually what it would be, because I think we were both looking for an opportunity to just kind of figure out what else we could do, what other kind of music we could make. And so we started toying with ideas, and he had this idea that he wanted to compose a long piece, a long kind of in a classical style, but for bluegrass instruments. And I thought that was an interesting idea. And, we kind of just put it on the back burner. He had more Nickel Creek stuff to do. I had other, I was involved in some other stuff. I was with Jerry Douglas. I was taking other sideman jobs, doing sessions in Los Angeles. But in the back of our minds, it was always kind of like, we're going to find some actual time to do this project. And I'll never forget, it was Telluride weekend in 2005. And this was actually the one Telluride in the last 21 years I didn't go to, because I was on the road with Kenny Loggins, of all people. And he called me on Sunday morning or Monday morning or something like that. And he said, hey, I think I found our next player in our band. I'm like, really? He said, yeah, this banjo player, Noam McKelney. Do you know him? And I said, you mean Pickles? And he's like, yeah, oh my God, he's amazing. And I said, yeah, I just played on his first solo record. Like, we just spent a week together making a record, and I thought he was fantastic. He's like, yeah, we just jammed all night long, and I think he should be in our band. And I was like, absolutely, that would be phenomenal. And so that, once we had mandolin, fiddle, and banjo, it was kind of obvious it was taking shape as a bluegrass band. And after we brought Noam in, he said, hey, what about Chris Eldridge? Do you know him? And I had met Critter, I think, once at a festival somewhere. And I was like, I don't really know him, but like I heard him play, and he's awesome. He'd be great. And I want to say like maybe a month or two later, Chris was in Nashville doing something, and he decided, called Noam, said, let's get together with a couple of guys, and it'll be a hang, but it'll be kind of an audition on the sly. And so they invited Critter over, and then Noam had played with Greg Garrison in Leftover Sam, and he said, let's bring Greg over because Greg's great, and let's just see what happens. And so they got together, and they played, and Chris kind of, they played tunes, and they hung, and they had drinks, and Chris started kind of throwing out some nuggets of ideas that he had for this piece. He didn't tell him what it was. He just like, hey, I have this idea. It's like this kind of thing. What if we do this? And what if you try this kind of thing? And somewhere I still have these voice memos, because they made recordings of them trying out stuff that ended up being The Blind Leading the Blind. And then he called me the next day after that, and he goes, okay, we have our band. Listen to this. And he sent me the voice memos. I'm like, okay, yes, that sounds phenomenal, and let's do it. And so the first time we actually got together to play was Thanksgiving week in 2005. And Chris had sent us this crazy finale file of just like, what is this? I'd never heard anything like it. And, it was in very, like, he'd just gotten the ideas down so they could be delivered to us. And, you press the space bar and the MIDI plays, and it's just like a barrage of just like, what is going on here? And we all set out to make sense of it. And it was really amazing. We all got it a few weeks before, so we had time to kind of prepare. But once we finally got in a room together, it was when, the magic kind of happened. We played, just to get started, we played this fiddle tune, St. Anne's Reel. And within 10 seconds, we were all like, oh, yes, this is really something. And over the course of the week, we worked up what he had written of The Blind Leading the Blind and a bunch of other stuff. And we ended up playing a show. We actually ended up playing 2 shows. One very informal, just at a bar in New York City. And then one that was actually kind of announced and promoted at a place that would become a mainstay in Punch Brothers world called the Living Room on the Lower East Side. And somewhere in my archives, I have a recording of that performance as well.
And what was the band even billed at that point? What was the band called?
It was billed as the Tensions Mountain Boys. Kind of, continuing with the 2 traditions in bluegrass of kind of something mountain boys and usually a pun of some kind. So that's what we went as, just because we needed something. And, strangely, talking about that gig, we played, it was either that one or the following one we did a couple weeks later, where we played, we call it Red-Handed, but it's the second half of the first movement of The Blind Leading the Blind, where it goes in a really fast piece, like more of like a song. And we played that at the late night opera house set at Telluride. And I was fine emotionally until that moment. I was holding it together. And when we played that piece, just the feeling of the first time of all of us getting on stage and like trying out this brand new music that we just learned, and it was something that was new and a stretch for all of us to try and to do. Just that the feeling of doing that came rushing back, and I was just like, wow, that hit me pretty hard at that moment.
Yeah. And how does the How to Grow a Woman record fit into that then? Because that was the first record you all made together.
That's right. So
but that's sort of pre-Punch and pre-Blind Leading the Blind being recorded.
That's right. So what we actually did was, after we had gotten most of the piece up and running, of The Blind Leading the Blind up and running, we got into the studio, and so Chris wrote the first movement and the last movement, before the remaining 2. And so we recorded those in a studio. And the idea was with just 2 mics in the room, everything live, and out to tape, like just really trying to eliminate as much as we can. So it was just about us playing music. And we did those 2 in a couple of days. And then the plan was to, as he wrote the other 2 movements, to get back together and record those, and then release that as our album, and that would be our project. And Chris and I will have fulfilled our dream of making something together, and we'd all go about our separate ways, and it would be a nice thing that exists in the world. But as things progressed, and he was writing, but we were getting together more often to work through the stuff that he had written. It really became apparent that we wanted to make more of this project than just that. And so it was also taking us longer it was taking him longer. In getting us all together, like he said, this, like the ideas just exploded. And so what he thought he was going to do with the piece ended up, he wanted to do more with it, because he started to get a sense of what we could do as an ensemble. And so the writing of the second and third movement actually took longer than he was anticipating. And in the meantime, we thought, we started to get a sense of what this music was going to be. And at the time, it seemed like a pretty radical departure from anything that any of us had ever done. And we were worried that it was going to be kind of a whiplash scenario if this was the first thing that we put out. And people were going to be scratching their heads and be going, what? Huh? This doesn't, like, to go from Nickel Creek to that, or anything else that, leftover salmon to that, or, whatever else we were doing was just going to be too, like, out of left field. So we decided that we would make a more traditional bluegrass record, which even for us is, like, not really that traditional, but compared to what we had been working on and what we knew was coming down the pike, this record is, like, straight down the middle. And so Chris had some ideas for some songs, and we had some ideas for some covers. And we thought, okay, let's just make a record really quick, like as quick as we can, and get it out there so that we present this project to the world with something that's accessible. And then once people know that we're a thing, then we can hit them with the heavy stuff. And so that's what we did. We got, I think we made How to Grow a Woman from the Ground. We had 3 days rehearsal and 3 days in the studio. And that's what came out of it.
And it's a great record. I love that record.
Yeah, I love it too. Listening to it now, almost 20 years later, we have so much energy. We're young, but we're also super excited to be doing it and making music with each other. And it just, I think it's a really fun record. Yeah.
Yeah.
Funny enough, we ended up making that record in the same studio, in the same configuration that we had made what we were calling now the demos of The Blind Leading the Blind. And so we put that record out. We put How to Grow a Woman from the Ground out and toured off of that. And then once we got done with that, None Such Records, Chris was moving to them. They said, what if you guys like redid Blind Leading the Blind let's get you into a different studio and capture it a different way. And you guys add a few more songs now that you're established. And that's what eventually became Punch.
We'll be right back with you just after this. Bluegrass Jam Along is proud to be sponsored by Collings Guitars and Mandolins. If you're attending the NAMM show in January, stop by the Collings booth to say hello to the team, get hands-on with their selection of customised acoustics and electrics, and check out some exciting new prototypes they're working on for 2024. They'll also have a few of their world-class artists on hand demoing various instruments. And if you can't attend, don't forget to follow their Instagram and Facebook accounts throughout the show for photos, videos, and the latest news. Collings guitars are hand-built from the Sound Up in Austin, Texas. This episode is also brought to you by Peghead Nation, the home of roots music instruction. If one of your 2024 resolutions is to improve as a musician, Peghead Nation is the place to go. They have 65 streaming video courses for guitar, mandolin, banjo, fiddle, dobro, bass and ukulele from some of the leading names in acoustic music. Courses cover bluegrass, old time, Irish music and swing, plus lessons dedicated to improvisation, theory and ear training. Your first course is just $20 a month and you can add more for $10. Try any course free for a month with the promo code JAMALONG. Make 2024 a year of more music at pegheadnation.com. And those two movements that you redid in the studio, are the original demos that different now you listen back to them? Or
no.
If you have you listened back to them, is it?
No, I haven't listened to them in a while, but we actually ended up recording the entire piece in that configuration. And I, there are some parts of it that are better, I think, than what we ended up with on the Punch record. And I have a feeling at some point in the future, those demos will be released. And people can compare and say, oh, listen to what went down this first time as opposed to the second time. Or, oh, I see why they got back into the studio because this sonic issue, needed to be resolved in a different way or, something like that. The 20-year anniversary is coming up, so I don't know. That might be a good time.
Well, and it's really interesting what you're saying about sort of anticipating the reaction to Blind Leading the Blind, coming cold to it, and that idea of, and so having those other songs around it on the record. But I love it because it starts with Punch Bowl, which is such a kind of statement of intent. It's like a mission statement calling card. It's so kind of pokes you in the ear and kind of wakes you up and goes, "This is what you're going to get some more of, so you might as well get used to it." And I love that. I love a record that just starts with like, "Get your coat on, we're going over here."
Yeah. It's yeah. The intention was to do exactly that, and it kind of makes you feel like maybe it's a pretty straight ahead bluegrass song, but then the tonality starts to tweak you, and you're like, "Wait, there's something." I don't want to say off about it, because I don't think it's off, but there's something like different about it. And it's like, okay, yes, we're in a familiar place, but we're in a totally different world within that place. And so hopefully, that sets things up for what's to come.
Yeah, totally. And then obviously you get the full experience of Blind Leading. And what I love about Blind Leading the Blind is it's got a sort of like song cycle quality. It's almost like listening to like a Schubert song cycle, or watching an opera, or it's like this condensed, fairly intense journey over the space of 35, 40 minutes. And there's a build and some resolution and some like tension and some release, and yet at moments it's just like somebody singing you a song as well. It's quite an extraordinary piece of music.
Yeah, I think that the what Chris set out to do was kind of combine all of the things that he loves in music and see if he could turn it into one consistent piece. Like, just like you said, it's, it can be very, can be very heavy musically, or intense musically, but then all of a sudden you're listening to a folk song. And there's also a lot of places he wanted to see if we could seamlessly go in and out of composed bits and improvisation seamlessly without it being apparent, like, this part must have been composed, and then now they're improvising over here. Like, there's a lot of parts in that piece where you can't tell, and there are parts where you can tell. We're like, okay, he's taking a solo, and that's probably improvised. Or I think there's one moment in the fourth movement where the whole piece for a minute is just complete band improvisation. It's like, we're going to F major 7 tonality, and we're just going to figure out what happens, and it's just going to go down. And so, yeah, it was an ambitious undertaking to figure out how to do all that, but it was really the thing that kind of allowed us to figure out where the boundaries for this ensemble were. And happy to say they were pretty far away. The boundaries were off in the distance somewhere. I don't even think we even got to them, within my tenure there. There's still unexplored territory.
That's what makes music and musicians endlessly fascinating, because there's that constant. I was talking to my son this morning about sports. He's like a massive football fan, and we were just talking about like players that. And it's the same with music. There's, for the people who are amazing at something, there's nothing is ever good enough. There's never, I've done it, I'm there, I've arrived, I've achieved. It's always, but what if I go there? Or what if?
Yeah. Well, the problem is that you get somewhere thinking you're going to get an answer, and you just get another question. So you're like, oh, okay, I guess I'm going to have to figure out what that is and what that means. And once you get there, there's only another question after that. So you're just constantly like, okay, let's go down this road and see what this is.
And it's really interesting to me. I came to see you guys at Bush Hall in London in 2008.
Wow.
And I'd like heard the band, and I sort of knew what I was in for. And I had a friend who had no idea who you were, who I'd just been with that afternoon. And he said, "What are you doing tonight?" I said, "I'm going to see this band." He went, "Can I come?" And I went, "Yeah. But
just like warning you."
Yeah, like it might not be. And he's now a lifelong Punch fan, and he loves it. Wow. He was blown away. But looking back at seeing the the documentary and seeing footage of you in the back of the cab on the way to that show going,
Mm-hmm.
do we do the whole piece? Do we break it up? Do we kind of, how are people going to take this? But from my experience of that night, it was such a complete, like, successful evening of musical communication, kind of on all levels.
Oh, good.
And to see the sort of conversations that probably happened 3 hours before that, was extraordinary.
Yeah, right. You know, we had those conversations a lot, and like I said before, our ingenious plan of releasing something accessible so that people would be more likely to give us a chance on the adventurous stuff didn't work. It did not do what we wanted it to do. One, because I think people were kind of already scratching their heads on how to grow a woman from the ground for some of that stuff. But then also once Punch came out, it was just like, we were going to get the reaction we were going to get regardless. There was just always this ongoing conversation of, do we just present it as what's the best way to do it? Present your piece as the thing that you intended, or do people need more context in the form of other songs? Do people need to take a break from listening in this way? So do we split up the movements? Do we do a couple up front and a couple of bluegrass songs and then finish the piece, or do we present the piece in its entirety? Like, how are we going to do this so that it gives people the best chance of taking it in and hopefully enjoying it? And you know, I think at some point we just said this was our vision. This is what it is. Like, we have to present it, you know, as if you're going to. We always make the analogy of like going to a great restaurant. You're going there because of the chef, you know, and if it's a tasting menu, get the tasting menu because they've designed this thing. It's like a set list, you know, of like the way they want you to have this experience. And yes, you can order a la carte off the menu and, you know, create your own experience, which I kind of liken to like, taking requests or, you know, picking things. But, you know, if you want to present your vision, then you need to do that. And some people will respond well and some people won't, but that's okay, because the ones that do you're going to bring them into your artistic world. And I think at the end of the day, that's what we settled on.
And is that, I sort of wonder, because the venue I saw you in was a seated venue. And I wondered, like, if presumably different nights you're playing different venues, and if you've got an audience that's standing,
yes,
that puts a different dynamic on it. And like, do you know what I mean? I find it fascinating because it's
very much so.
Because there's like such a classical element to that piece, but at the same time, it's not classical music. And there's such a kind of bluegrass folk element, but at the same time, it's not bluegrass. And so, like, I love music that you have to work a bit at. Mm-hmm. But finding that balance of, like, how far people are prepared to work must be a constantly shifting sort of boundary.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point of venue makes a huge difference as to what people are expecting for that evening of music. And you can take the same band playing the same set list and the same audience, put them in two different kinds of venues. Like you said, you can put them in a bar with standing room only, or you can put them in a concert hall, and you will have completely different experiences. Same people, same music, completely different experiences. And that was one thing we learned very quickly, is that venue dictates so much of the expectation of what the night is going to be. I'll never forget, we were touring for Punch, playing Blind Leading the Blind in its entirety every night. And we played this club in San Diego, California called the Belly Up, which is just like, it's a rock club, you know, with a big bar in the center of the room and a giant shark hanging down. And the whole club is like padded in this like black carpet to keep, the sound down, because the people that play there are, just cranking it up. And here we are with our two little microphones, playing this very intricate, bluegrass acoustic music in this. It's just like the completely wrong place to be doing this. And the people that came, there was people that sat, and they had folding chairs and they put them out. But then there were people that just came to the bar and they were just like, what the hell is going on up there? And it felt like the notes were going out about 3 feet in front of the stage and just like disappearing into, nothingness. And, we did it. We made it through. And it wasn't the only place like that we played at that time or on that tour, but it was just like, it just felt like you were playing into the void. Meanwhile, we had played that same music at Carnegie Hall in Zankel Hall in the small room. And it's like, yeah, that's where it made sense. So the context of that, the context is important.
Yeah. Well, I interviewed Critter ages ago, and I asked him about, because when I saw you in London the night before, you'd been playing in Glasgow and it hadn't gone so well. Mm-hmm. And I asked him about that. And he said he said he thought the problem was more expectation than anything, because it had been billed on the posters as a bluegrass gig. And so people came
hot bluegrass or something like that. Yeah.
And he said and again, it's before you've even set foot on a stage, like venue matters, but also the mood you're enticing the audience to arrive in also matters.
Yeah. I don't know if it made it into the documentary or not, but for some reason I remember seeing something where we're just like, we see how it's billed, hot bluegrass. And we're just like, oh no. So we know what we're in for, and I will say, even in the documentary, like, editing is a powerful tool. Like, it looked worse than it actually was, because, we actually did do the thing of, we played maybe 5 or 6 bluegrass songs first before we got into the piece. But then, there was a lot of head scratching during the piece, and then the one drunk guy heckling us from the back of the room.
Which is obviously the bit that they're going to show, right? Like Bob Dylan has Judas shouted at him once, and it's followed him around for years.
Yeah. And that's, one of the most famous moments in his career.
Yeah. And so, like, at what point did it become clear to you that this was more than a 1 or 2 album project? Was like Punch that point, or did that come a bit later?
No, I mean, it was earlier. I think within the first couple of get-togethers in 2005, we knew that we wanted it to be an actual serious, ongoing band. And I remember Noam saying, we should really consider putting some time into this, and like, let's give it 5 years and see where we're at. And I think at the 5-year mark, no one even blinked, at continue. It was just obvious, like, yes, this is a thing and this is what we're doing now. And, until last year for me, there wasn't ever a question that it would just continue on in perpetuity. And so it was just kind of this, it was just thing. It just made too much sense and was too fun. And we were, I think as long as the creativity is still there and we're all feeling like there's more things to explore and new sounds are being made. And of course, the personal relationships also have to be there, because if you hate each other, then there's no reason to do it unless you're making a gazillion dollars, which of course we're not. But it just kind of was like, we would finish a project, and there's always 2 parts to making a record, right? There's the making of the record, and then there's what happens after you put it out into the world, and then the touring of the record. And by the time, what you think you've made when you release the record into the world, it hasn't even been revealed to you yet. So you spend the next year and a half playing in front of people, and then what you've made is actually revealed. And then you can assess and say, okay, this was really successful, or this thing I thought was this one thing isn't that. So let's try and figure out what we thought we had made and see if we can make that thing this next time. And so there's this ongoing kind of conversation between the musicians, but also with the audience as to what it is that you're doing. And so the next record always gives you an opportunity to kind of figure out the stuff that, keep going with the stuff that works, or figure out why the stuff you thought would work didn't work, and remake that in some way that hopefully works. And then add in some whatever new element that you've discovered or you want to approach, or you didn't get to put in the last record for whatever reason. So there's always I feel like there's always this next, like, okay, now we're going to try this. Okay, now we're going to try this. And that's just the way that it went for us. And it will continue to go.
Well, and it's interesting, you were talking about the personal element and the relationships bit of it, and it felt like, as an outsider, but we watch things happen now because of social media, and we feel like we're involved with the bands we know on a week in, week out basis, and that's been around for a while. And it felt like there was this sort of sense, like, we're all moving to New York, and it felt like there was a real intent to be like a gang, and you all had nicknames for each other, and it felt like almost this sort of gang mentality. We're in this now, and we're committing to it, and we're creating a thing. We're not just playing music; we are sort of forming a unit. And it was fascinating to see it, because it felt so deliberate.
Yeah, and it was, before, in the I guess it was 2.5, 3 years from when we first got together to when Punch came out. Everyone kind of was tying up their loose ends. Critter was in the infamous String Dusters, and he kind of just started that band when this came along, and he had to navigate that terrain because those guys were his best friends. So he ultimately said, I'm going to give you guys a year, but then I'm going to jump over and do Punch Brothers. And I had, a whole thing going on in Los Angeles, where I'm from, that I had to tie up those loose ends. And, I had been with Jerry Douglas for 6 years and kind of had to figure out how to make my exit from that. And Chris had put Nickel Creek on hiatus. So there was a lot of stuff going on, and we all lived in different places. I was in LA, Greg Garrison lived in Colorado, Chris was in New York, Noam and Critter were in Nashville. So it was really hard to get together. We'd have to plan time, we'd have to fly and meet. And so once we decided, like, okay, this is the thing, everyone's going to be out of their commitments and we can really focus on it. Like, we need to all be in the same place. And it was either going to be Chicago or New York. And as you saw at the end of the documentary, the stuff with Greg didn't really work out, and part of it was the moving aspect of it. And he was the only one at the time with a family, and he's just like, I can't uproot my family to take a chance on this band, and which is, now as a parent myself of two, I can totally understand that. And he made his exit, and we descended upon New York, and right about the same time found Paul, and he was fresh out of college. I mean, he was starting his senior year at the Curtis Institute. So we plucked him out of college. He had no responsibilities or anything. So he was kind of the perfect guy to come in and do that. But yeah, it was very intentional. We are going to move to the same place. It's going to be it has to be a hotbed of creativity and artistic goings on all over the place. And Chris was already in New York. That's where we started getting together. That's where the band kind of was born anyway, in a real sense. And so it made sense for us to go there. And it was fantastic. All of the good and bad elements of New York was really, I'll look back on that period of my life with great, great fondness.
And it's just even at the time, sort of hearing live recordings of stuff at the living room, or, and there's a bit of, in the deluxe version of Anti-Fogmatic, there's a DVD with one of the P-Bingo nights, and just this, it felt like a combination of a residency and just a sort of like I don't know, I've never seen anything quite like it. It's the idea that you turn up every week, try some new stuff, play some songs, take some requests, play a bit of Bach, to see how it all went. And it just felt like such a joyous thing to see,
really
even
was.
from a distance.
Yeah, no, it was really just such a fun thing to do. And, the point was like, yes, let's get a regular gig so that we, start becoming familiar to people, but let's do it in a way where we can experiment with all the stuff that we are thinking about. And, yes, let's do a all Radiohead night where we play our favorite Radiohead songs and see if we can map them from their ensemble onto our ensemble and let's see if we can make it work. Yes, let's try, let's do the Brandenburg Concerto or a movement from a Mozart quartet or something to see if that works. Or let's, it was just, it was like a laboratory where it was a safe enough space to where we could feel okay about something not being successful. And if it didn't work, fine. And if it did work, great, even better. And it was like, it was also a challenge of, we know we're coming back next week. How are we going to outdo ourselves? How are we going to up the ante each time? And it really forces you to work fast. It forces you to get to the heart of what you're trying to do. And every single thing that we worked up for those nights somehow made it into our own compositions, whether it was, an orchestration solution to figuring out how to make other sounds on these instruments, to, this kind of feel from this song that normally we wouldn't ever do ourselves, but like now we've figured out how to do that and make it work in this context. I mean, just all the things that you can think of, all the bits and pieces and bones of how to make these things work in this ensemble made it into our original music, and it was invaluable.
It's really interesting because after that sort of, treating Blind Leading the Blind, sort of talking about two mics and tape and a room and trying to get out of the way of it, you sort of then embark on these sort of collection of studio albums, all of which have a producer and a producer with a pretty strong musical character in each case, all very different, and a very like wide tonal palette, including some drums, including some kind of process treated stuff, and so it's just and I guess that's all part of the exploration we're talking about, right? But I'm fascinated by that because you are also a producer yourself, and that I presume is a big part of the next chapter for you. And I'm just curious how, like, working on that stuff and bringing somebody else in, because you become such a like tight knit little group of people and such a driven, and then to bring somebody else in and go, what do you think?
Yeah,
where should we go?
I think it's so important. You can get so walled off and myopic especially in a context like Punch Brothers, where we're really like working hard on what we're doing, and you can lose sight of whether or not you're actually communicating what you want to communicate. So, I think it's really, really beneficial to have outside ears that you trust to come in and tell you whether or not it's actually translating the way you want it to. And if it's not, to help you, or even just to tell you why it's not and what they think you need to do in order to get it there. Each producer that we had was exactly the right producer for that moment in time for us to tell us those things, and help us, figure out how to get where we wanted to be. When we first started, we're very, very adamant that we just wanted to capture the instruments or the ensemble as it is. And that's what you hear on How to Grow. We're literally just sitting in a semicircle and playing these songs. And that's great. And that's also what we did on Punch, just in a different room. You can hear the difference in rooms sonically between those two records. And then when we got into the studio to make Anti-Fogmatic, we were still, as a band, just very much like, no, it needs to be as natural sounding as possible. But John Bryan, our producer, was like, okay, I think that I understand why you wanted to do it that way. So let me try and figure out how to maintain that for you guys while also helping you guys sonically. And so there was a different way of recording for us where we recorded all the tracks instrumentally without vocals, with us just kind of imagining the vocals. It was a very tricky thing to do, where we would play and imagine where the vocals are. So anytime you hear a fill in between a vocal or any of that kind of stuff, that was all us playing without a vocal.
Right.
And then we had Chris go back in. I think, and actually I sang a song on that album too. So we had the vocalist come in afterwards and overdub vocals to what was there. And, there are pros and cons to doing it that way. Mm-hmm. Sonically, I think you probably get better result on the vocal, but you end up losing the legitimate response from the band. And also there are very subtle timing and pocket things that end up not happening because you're not playing to a vocal. You're just playing to, an instrumental track, essentially playing to where the pulse is. But it was important for us to do it that way and to hear what we sound like in a really wonderful sonic environment. It's like, okay, there are sonic benefits to helping the music translate in this way. Maybe what are we going to do next time? How do we take the stuff that worked from that and apply it to the next time while, maybe having Chris sing live? It's a really hard, the trickiest thing in making Punch Brothers records is that you can't get a good, it's very, I'm not going to say you can't. It's the trickiest part is getting a good vocal sound and a good mandolin sound together, because the way the phasing works and the microphone placement, all of the stuff you don't want from the mandolin, all of the high end, all the pick noise, all of the stuff that's just like, get that out of here. That is what comes up vertically off of the mandolin and straight into the vocal mic. So if you EQ to get that stuff out of the vocal mic, then the vocal sounds terrible. And then if you leave it in there, then the mandolin sounds terrible. So it's like always this balance of how are we going to figure out that so that we can get the vocal with the performance and we can all play that way together. And we've tried a bunch of different ways, and I think we figured it out.
And was that so? Did all the vocals go on after? Were there any sort of breaks or solos that went on after the vocals? Like you say, it was recorded that way. There's one track on Anti-Fogmatic, like Missy, which has a fiddle break on that I love. It's one of my favourite bits of recorded fiddle playing of. And what is astonishing about it is that thing that a proper solo does, which is take the energy from where the singer leaves it off and then lifts it to somewhere else and hands it back for them to go even further. Mm-hmm. Whatever form that is, like it's just a taking of energy and a kind of nurturing of it and passing it back to somebody.
Yeah. To
think of that fiddle solo being recorded without any vocal on that track at all,
that's right,
astounds me slightly.
Oh. Yeah, I mean that's the way it went down. So the solo was live. If I recall correctly, I think we did 3 takes of that song instrumentally before the vocal went on, and that was take 3. And I think if it's not a complete take from top to bottom, then it might have been a front verse from 2 or the start from 2 and then on to 3. And probably if you go back and hear each solo, I think the idea is probably there in 1, and then it's like a little bit more shape in 2, and then 3 is what's on the record. And I remember, so John Bryan produced that record, Anti-Fogmatic, and most of the time he actually wasn't in the studio for the recording. He would come towards the end of the night and listen to the last take or 2 of whatever we were doing, and then after we'd leave, he'd go back and listen to everything, and then in the morning we would actually hang out a lot and talk late into the night, but he would kind of implant ideas in our heads of how to approach recording stuff. And the next day we'd come and we'd try it. But I remember we tracked Missy. It was the last song of that night, and we had turned all the lights down in the studio. So it was just barely enough to be able to see what you're doing. And we played it 3 times. And when we did the 3rd time and I did the solo, and I'm like, I'm getting to the end and I can see the finish line. I know exactly where it's going, and I remember finishing that solo. My heart was pounding because I knew, like, oh yeah, I think I got a good one here. And we finished the song and I look up and there's John Bryan in the control room, just like jumping up and down with his arms in the air. And I'm like, oh yeah, I guess maybe that was a good one. One of the few times that he was there and just like, that was nice. That was a good one.
And like we could keep talking and go through every Punch Brothers record, and I could talk to you for like hours. But
yeah,
I'm really interested.
Part 2, right?
Yeah, I'm really interested in, because I don't know this, but I'm presuming that producing is going to be sort of one of the things you want to spend more time doing after Punch Brothers. Yeah. And was that something you were already doing yourself at this point?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I've been kind of producing various things since my dad gave me a 4-track recorder when I was 10 years old. Just always making recordings, and I kind of became a session musician here in Los Angeles when I was 14. So just spent a lot of my time in the studio making recordings and being on sessions and doing that kind of stuff. And I will definitely continue to do it. But yeah, my behind the scenes role in Punch Brothers essentially over the course of our tenure was the producer. I was always the go-to, even when we had, like, less so on the early records. So we were still all just kind of finding our bearings. But once we did Phosphorescent Blues and T-Bone, we had T-Bone in the studio, and I was kind of even outside of Punch Brothers, kind of becoming one of his lieutenants, I guess you could say, where he would bring me in on projects that he physically couldn't finish all, the workload of, and like, okay, he would dole out stuff for me to do. Like, he was working on this show, Nashville, that was on ABC 10 years ago or something like that. And there was just so much music to be made. He's like, okay, you're in town, you're in LA. Okay, you're come to the studio, and these 4 songs are going to be your responsibility. Okay, great. So go off and make them. Okay, cool. I'll make these songs and then bring them back. And so by the time we did Phosphorescent Blues, I was already kind of working that way with him. And he was fantastic in the studio, and I think he got what is probably our best record out of us. But a lot of the stuff where he knew that it was under control, he left to me to kind of see it through and kind of and be with the other guys in the band and figure out how to get the ideas across onto tape, which actually it was onto tape, and then we put it in Pro Tools, but first to tape. And then after that record, we self-produced the previous 2. We self-produced All Ashore and Church Street Blues, which, if there was, it really was collaborative effort, but if there was anyone who would have fulfilled the role of what an outside producer would have done, then that stuff fell to me.
And it's an interesting one, because to, like, the outside listener, what the role of a producer is can be a bit hard to grasp at times. And the role of a producer changes very much with different records. Like, sometimes it's, to sort of drag the music out of somebody. Sometimes it's to find shapes and sounds and settings for songs. Sometimes it's just to get people playing together, and and I'm sure it's all, and I heard you talking at one point about you produced a record of Critters and Julian Large's that I love, Mount Royal. And I read something or heard something you'd said about having a bit of a struggle with song selection for Chris for that record. And I love Chris's voice. I think, and like one of the songs that's on there, the Eddie Vedder song, Sleeping by Myself, is just one of the most beautiful things that there is. And to hear that you'd sort of gone through a bit of a round of going, there's these other songs you want to do, and I think I'm going to steer him away from those because they don't quite suit his voice or whatever the reasoning was, It's fascinating hearing that. Already knowing the record.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's just the process of any record. And like you're saying, the role of a record producer is pretty nebulous. What does this person actually do? And, my answer is just that they do whatever needs to be done in order to get this record from not existing to existing. And every artist, even every record, every song requires a different approach. So yeah, you may need to be a really hands-on producer where you're helping write the songs and arrange the songs and figuring out how to record them and get the best performances out of everyone. Or you can be a producer who sets up some microphones, listens back behind the speakers and says, yes, this is translating and it's sounding good. And that's all you, and then you get out of the way, and so, and I think the biggest thing that a producer is, they're a proxy for the audience, right? They're the first set of ears that are hearing this thing. And you also have to approach it like, I'm the audience. How am I reacting to this? And then you're the only person, the only audience member who's in a position to actually fix things that aren't working. So, that's kind of the role. And to your comment about, song selection and figuring that stuff out with Critter, that's part of the gig. And you want a producer you trust. You don't want someone whose opinions you don't value, because they're going to maybe tell you stuff that you didn't think of or feels counter to what you believe or thought it was going to be. And if you don't trust them, then why have them there? And ultimately everyone wants to make the best thing possible. So get somebody whose ears you trust and has a way of communicating that doesn't get in your head and prevent you from actually achieving what you want to achieve.
And I guess with, particularly with like complex acoustic music, like going back to your point before about sometimes losing sight of whether you've communicated what you're trying to communicate, like to be able to be the person going, yeah, brilliant, you got all the notes right, beautiful, not feeling it. Like,
absolutely. Yeah. And that's,
I'm sure in your own head, you can get so caught up in either one or the other that the other loses a bit.
100%. That happens all the time. And we've really gotten in the habit of making little voice memos of stuff, especially when we're working on a complex idea that maybe, it's taking a long time to work through, like 3 or 4 bars of something. We've like sat down and like tried to figure this thing out for a couple of hours and like, I think we've got it. We always make a recording of it and put it away. And we always make a bad, we want to listen on fresh ears because you want to have the hardest thing to do as a composer, I feel like, especially if you're working on something for a long period of time, is to have the experience of hearing it as if you're hearing it for the first time. So like I was saying, we've gotten into the habit of we'll work on something, we'll record it, we'll put it away, and then sleep on it. And in the morning or 2 days later, or sometimes a month later, we'll go back and listen to it. And it's as close as you'll get as to having the impression of hearing it for the first time. And only then can you really assess what you have. Unless you bring in an outside set of ears.
Yeah, it's funny when back in the days when I was in a band and we'd record stuff, like whatever we recorded it on tape, was digital or whatever, we'd always mix stuff down onto a cassette and go and listen to it in somebody's car. Mm-hmm. It's like you're sat there with these beautiful studio monitors playing back your own music to yourself. and you can get lost in this sort of glorious world of, don't we sound great? And so you just go and listen to it, and what everybody else is going to hear it on.
Yeah.
And you go,
absolutely.
Okay, can't hit the bass. Okay.
Always. I mean, yes. Check your mix in the studio. Go put it in the car. Go play an MP3 through your phone. See if it's working. That's one of the things that John Bryan imparted on us that I hadn't really thought of. I don't think any of us had really thought of, is just how it's a miracle that any records actually get made that sound good. I mean, not that they sound good, but it's a miracle that records connect with people, just because everyone is listening on a different system, and what you thought you were doing in the studio is not what you're going to get on a certain different system. And obviously people have figured out ways to plan for the best or plan for the worst, hope for the best. But yeah, you got to reference as much as you can, because you just don't know what somebody's going to be listening on. It may be a 30-year-old boombox that they just happen to still have laying around in their garage somewhere, or they might have a nice Macintosh preamp and be listening on a $10,000 system. You really don't know.
Yeah. And you're sort of talking earlier on about sort of the constant regeneration of ideas, and as long as the ideas are still there. And you said sort of around a year ago you started thinking that maybe this wasn't for you anymore. I'm just curious to know what that process was, really.
It's not even that, really, because personally we're all as good of friends and getting along as well as we ever have. Musically, we're making the best music I think we've ever made, and playing the best as an ensemble we've ever played. And I have my voice memo app is filled with starts of stuff that we've collected over the last 2 years, and really cool stuff. But there's also a whole life outside of that world that I have to consider now. And I have small children, I'm married, and it's really important to me to be able to create the stable environment that I had when I was young for my family. And my kids they're going to be 9 and 6. Well, one turned 6 yesterday, actually. And the older one will be 9 in a month. And the idea that I'm halfway there raising him is crazy to me, because it feels like he was just born, and I just needed to put the brakes on stuff and change the way that I'm going about my life so that I can really have this time with them. It's going by so fast. For as crazy as the pandemic was, the shutdown is actually really eye-opening for me, because I've been performing since I was 4 years old, and I've been performing professionally since I was 6. And I started touring when I was 15, and I turned 45 a couple weeks ago. I've literally been doing it my whole life, and I've never thought twice about it. And I've just always been like, forward, 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 go. Oh, here's this next thing. I'm going to do this next thing. I'm going to do this next thing. And for the first time in my life in the pandemic, I was like stationary. I didn't have anywhere to go. I didn't have anything to do except, wait this thing out and be with my family. And I was like, oh, this is an okay way to live. And I'm creating deep meaning for us here in our family life. And being back out on the road last year, I love playing music, and I love performing music, and I love doing it with Punch Brothers and my bandmates and all of that. But I was out there going, yeah, boy, this is really taking away from this thing that we were able to create at home. And that thing is finite, in that the kids will grow up and move away. And I just had this epiphany of like, we've been doing Punch Brothers for almost 20 years, and it's okay to take a break. I would be absolutely shocked if we never played music again together. I just don't think that's a possibility. But for now, yeah, I'm kind of reassessed and prioritizing different things. I think the other thing is we achieved what we set out to achieve when we all moved to New York. We did the thing that we set out to do, and we went way beyond it even. So I feel like anything else is bonus. And at this point, yeah, I want to be home. I want to have this time with my family. And, when my kids are gone and grown, who knows? Maybe there'll be another Punch Brothers record or more things to have happen. So yeah, that's kind of where I was at with it all. And it was a hard decision to come to, but ultimately, I feel good about it, and I'm excited about what's going to happen.
And do you know sort of what the next sort of few months or year look like, or is it a case of waiting to see yet?
Well, there's a little bit of waiting to see. I've been scoring film and television the last couple of years, so I imagine once the writer's strike is resolved and things get back into production, there'll be more of that stuff on the horizon. Producing records, I'm in the final stages of doing the record for Willie Watson, formerly of the Old Crow Medicine Show. So me and Kenneth Pattingale from the Milk Carton Kids are co-producing that one. It should be hopefully out, end of the year or beginning of next year. And then I've been doing a ton of arranging, symphonic arranging, strangely enough, not something I thought I would be getting into, but I just turned in a piece for the San Francisco Symphony. They're going to play at their 4th of July concert. I did some stuff for the Kennedy Center, and the big project that'll happen this fall is I was asked by the Martha Graham Dance Company to adapt Copland's Rodeo Ballet for bluegrass instruments.
Oh, wow.
And they're going to do the original choreography, the original Agnes DeMille choreography with us playing this new arrangement of this piece.
Feels amazing that hasn't happened yet, doesn't it, really?
I know, right? It's kind of wild. And so I'll be, drawing upon all of my experience with, with Blind Leading the Blind and all of that to kind of bring this piece, make this piece as successful as it can be on these instruments.
Who's more qualified to do that?
Yeah, there are a few people, but only a few.
Brilliant. Well, I mean, best of luck with all of it. It sounds very much like a choice to step towards something than a choice to step away from something, and
that's what it is. Yeah, and I it wasn't. I didn't feel like it was fair to the other guys to say, I only want to do this 2 weeks a year, or what, whatever would have been an appropriate amount of time for me personally. And prevent them from continuing to do it as much as they want. So, the decision to split was so that they can continue to do it. And, and Brittany Haas is stepping in, and she's, her and Stuart Duncan are my two favorite living fiddle players. There are a lot of other ones that I love too. So I love you guys if you're listening to this. But Brittany's going to be amazing, and she has a history with Chris, and obviously with Paul, and she's actually filled in for me a couple of times when I was out of commission with COVID last year, and so she seemed like the obvious choice to do it, and it's going to be great. And I as a fan, I can't wait to hear what they come up with.
Yeah, me too. It's exciting,
but going to be.
It's interesting. My sort of strangely, my first thought was, we'll miss the fiddle playing, but a very quick second thought was, well, this is going to change the vocal mix, because that thing that you and the two and you and the two Chris's have together, I know you all sing, but you and the two Chris's do the bulk of it, and it's those harmonies are a huge part of what makes Punch sound like Punch.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too this past weekend. Like, how are they going to do a couple of these songs, which are very dependent upon, like you said, that vocal blend. Paul can get in there and sing very well in the blend as well. So a lot of that stuff he can cover. But then there's stuff where everyone's singing. But they'll figure it out. or retire those songs. I don't know. I don't know, but you got a good brain trust in that group, so they'll figure it out.
They've solved a lot of problems in the past. They'll probably got some problem solving left in them. I mean, I can't let you go without just saying thank you for just some of my favorite music of all time, and some of the best experiences of live music I've ever had. I think the last time I saw Punch over here was the All Ashore tour. I think that's the last time you were here.
Oh yeah.
And the moment where
the Barbican? Wait, where was that? Yeah.
Yes. And the moment that you stepped out from the mics for the last minute or two of familiarity is just one of those, hairs on the back of the hairs on the back of the hairs on the back of the whatever moments of just being in a thing that is a world in 2 minutes that is then gone.
Well, that's lovely, absolutely lovely to hear, because that's what we're striving for every night. So to know that experience was being created and enjoyed is very meaningful. So I appreciate that.
Well, thank you for all the music and all the music to come, and thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me. I've enjoyed this so much. Thank you
for inviting me and having me on. I really appreciate it.
Bluegrass Jam Along is proud to be sponsored by Collings Guitars and Mandolins, making some of the finest guitars and mandolins in the world since the 1970s. Visit collingsguitars.com and find out why.